Welcome to Channel 24. In the face of ongoing Russian aggression, Ukraine continues to demonstrate resilience and determination. Recent developments on the front lines and in military strategy highlight challenges and advancements for the Ukrainian armed forces. Austrian military analyst TomCooper is joining us online to talk more about vital topics in this war. Hi, Tom.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to be with you, Natalie.
Tom, let's start with the situation on the front lines. Is there any good news for Ukraine? Any breakthroughs?
Well, on the front lines, not really.
Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because it's kind of ironic, you know, and I guess you're going to ask me about this later on. But you know, if you talk with troops who are fighting the Russians, you hear entirely different things from them than you hear from higher ranks, you know, from especially from ranks above the brigade commanders. Brigade commanders are desperate and sorry, not brigade commanders, but higher ranking generals are kind of desperate, and they have only problems, and they see problems everywhere and have no solutions. While troops on the ground who are fighting Russians, they have lots of solutions, lots of ideas. They are often in very good spirits, regardless how fatalist. So it's, you know, like you're talking with two different forces, not only with Ukrainian, but with somebody else as well. That's why I'm smiling, excuse me.
No, it's fine. We will go and we'll move forward to that point you mentioned. But just about the latest thing that's happening on the battlefield.
Well, more or less, the last 3 weeks, we have seen the Russian offensive slowing down. Especially in Kursk area, where Drapati has taken over. As you see, I have to smile as soon as I mention General Syrskyi. General Syrskyi has given command over the Kursk area to General Drapati, and General Drapati has essentially stopped the Russian advance in that sector. So this is good news. While further south, already in Andreevka sector, General Syrskyi is still in command, and there is a big problem with 6 Ukrainian brigades or elements from 6 Ukrainian brigades de facto surrounded from 3 sides by the Russians. And the things are very critical over there. So, you know, it's balancing each other. In other sectors, for example, because Syrskyi is so busy with Andreevka sector, he is not taking care about Kupiansk sector, and therefore the Russians are expanding their bridgeheads on the western side, you know, north of Kupiansk and south of Kupiansk. But this is expansion, you know, of 100 meters a week or something like this. So theoretically, if anybody would in Kiev would come to the idea to send a few reinforcements to Kupiansk area, these bridgeheads could be destroyed, or at least the Russian advance and apostrophes in these areas could be stopped. But this is not happening. And then you have Kharkiv and Kursk. In Kharkiv, the Ukrainians are holding the front line, even liberating some ground. And in Kursk, the Russians are assaulting now anew, also deploying lots of airstrikes over there and really hitting the Ukrainians very hard. So it's not simple, and Ukrainians are slowly losing the ground in Kursk. So, well, we are going to see what happens over there.
Yeah, Tom, we will unpack all the things you mentioned slowly, but I know that you're quite critical about General Syrskyi, and I know you advocate for military reform during wartime, as far as I understood. Yes. How long could this take, and what potential outcomes might it yield?
Well, the point about military reform is to improve the efficiency, combat effectiveness of the Ukrainian armed forces. If your troops are better trained, they're fighting better. If they're better commanded, they're fighting better too. Right now you have about a dozen of brigades in the ZSU, in the Ukrainian army, which are well trained and well commanded and which are fighting well, but the rest is not. The rest lacks training, the rest lacks command skills, the rest lacks equipment and everything else. And this is the responsibility of the top commander on top, Glavkom, and the general staff of Ukrainian armed forces. They are not doing their job. They are from my point of view, incompetent, proven as incompetent repeatedly, and therefore the situation is not improving. And that is the primary problem. Because of this, you have also troubles with recruitment and mobilization. Because of this, you have a problem with utilization of equipment you're receiving, with utilization of ammunition you're receiving, and so on and so on. And this is why your armed forces have such huge problems with trying to stop this Russian offensive, which is now lasting for over a year, actually for 1.5 years almost, since October 23.
So, as far as I understood, our soldiers doing well, but the problem is top generals.
Yes. Exactly. This is why I'm smiling always, because it is silly, really. When you monitor the behavior of Glavkom in particular, and several weeks ago I posted something on my blog and I listed all the characteristics of his style of command, and this was actually a conclusion based on what I've got to hear over months and meanwhile years. And almost immediately after I posted this, I've started receiving thank you very much, messages. Thank you very much. Yes, it's exactly like you have written. It is that and that way. And see, this is precise description of Syrskyi, how is he commanding. He's first ignoring the problem. Then once the problem does appear, then he is surprised by the problem. Then he sends a battalion to solve the problem. Then he is sending this battalion to run pointless counterattacks. Then he gets frustrated by the situation and forgets and abandons it and refocuses his attention somewhere else. And he's never learning a single lesson from any of his mistakes. And I said, this is what is resulting in very poor effectiveness, combat effectiveness of the mass of the ZSU. And this has to change. This is where the reform has to start. A new Glavkom, and then a complete reform of the training procedures, retraining of the entire force. This wouldn't take longer than 6 to 9 months at most. You have enough officers who know how this should be organized, how this should be run. The Glavkom and the general staff have received serious offers from several officers who have told them, let me reorganize the entire force, let me retrain the entire force. But they said no, or there is no time for this, or this is not the right moment for that, and so on and so on. And nothing is happening. They're still fighting like they think the Soviets would have fought in, let's say, 1980.
So the way Syrskyi behaving, it cannot be the strategy.
It is not strategy. This is, I mean, if he has a strategy, this is to survive, somehow to muddle himself out of this trouble in which he is swimming all the time. But this is, he's not having no vision for the future of the ZSU. He is not solving any kind of problems. He's just, patching the front line with ever additional battalions taken from brigades from another sector, and creating ever bigger chaos. Not taking care for units, neighboring units to communicate and coordinate their operations. Not taking care to command them. Not taking care to build up reserves. Not instilling the care for soldiers between his subordinate commanders, between especially the general staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ministry of Defense, and not to talk about so many of brigade commanders who are inexperienced, who lack the command skills and so on. He's doing nothing to improve the situation. He's solely focused on finding out where are the problems. He's always doing that too late. Then he's always reacting in the same fashion. He's becoming extremely predictable for the Russians, which is making their job easier. I mean, you have to imagine this, and this is the top commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, and so on and so on. See, he's just causing troubles to Ukraine, nothing else. Troubles, ever continuous losses, heavy losses, unnecessary losses, especially in soldiers, in equipment, and so on and so on. And at the same time, no problem has been solved by him, not a one, over these 2 years he's in command now.
Let's shift a bit of our external, I would say, military operation. You mentioned Kursk. Tom,
yes.
After months of Ukraine did it, how reasonable, how effective it was?
Kursk as an operation, as a distraction or diversion, was a very good idea. Absolutely no discussion about this. And especially had the Glavkom and his staff understood the problems with supplies right from the start, and taken care to open additional routes via Sudzba to Korenevo And in order to secure this sole battalion that was sent to capture Korenevo, to have enough ammunition when it was the issue of having enough ammunition, it would have had a very nice outlooks for much bigger success, because the CSU could have taken Korenevo, could have driven further north, could have blocked this entire highway west of Kursk, and with this it would have made Russian counterattacks much more problematic than they are since September. So this was a brilliant opportunity that was wasted. And sadly, meanwhile, also about 600 troops were killed in this offensive or while defending from Russian counterattacks. Many more have been injured, many of them very badly. And this is once again the same situation like in Bakhmut in early 23, where the best Ukrainian troops are wasted for a case that is actually lost. Because we have seen it already. Zelensky has, via diplomatic channels, offered Putin to exchange Kursk for certain other part of Ukraine, and Putin promptly said no. Why? Because he's convinced he can return Kursk or completely liberate Kursk on his own with help of his armed forces, and if not, then with help of North Koreans.
Professor Eltsov, what do you make of all this?
So this is, I would say, I would use actually a German term, Zeitenwende. You know, when the war started, the full-scale war, that was the term in a speech which Olaf Scholz used, and that means like a tectonic change of like everything. So like I would say that with the United States election and Donald Trump becoming again the president, we definitely have a tectonic change like everywhere in the United States, in Europe, with NATO, with the United States approach to the Russian-Ukrainian war. So it's very difficult to predict and to say what actually is going to happen, because domestically, of course, we are having major changes with Elon Musk cutting down the government. So we have to wait how the legal system will unfold, because now there are a bunch of lawsuits against the activity of Elon Musk and his team. On the European front, we definitely see, as the vice president said, that there is a major change. So there is more orientation on Asia rather than Europe. And I think President Zelensky just recently warned Europeans, basically said that the United States, it's not the United States' priority any longer to provide security to Europe. And I think, yes, this is the case. I wouldn't be like an alarmist. It's not the end of NATO, but definitely we're going to see some very major changes. And of course, a lot depends also, like, for example, I believe just in a few days, we'll see elections in Germany, which will be very important, see how much Alternative für Deutschland will get, which is a very right-wing party. And the majority of them don't want to help Ukraine. So, I mean, we have to wait and see, but it's definitely, we are witnessing a historic change, which I would compare to something like the end of the Cold War or 9/11, the beginning of full-scale invasion for Ukraine. We will see major changes all over the world.
Yeah, we will talk about Europe just a bit later, but the new U.S. administration seems to have a disdain from the Constitution. Don't you think so? Any thoughts about that?
Well, again, I don't want to be an alarmist, and I believe, yes, it seems like authoritarian tendencies, but the United States, but that's also we see like in many countries of the world, like, for example, in Hungary, which is traditionally a democratic country, or in Turkey with leaders like Erdogan or Orban. But I do believe, I do have a deep faith in American Constitution and a separation of powers. Again, we will see how the lawsuits will develop. So I would not be like an alarmist and say that, I mean, yes, we are witnessing, I would say, some kind of a constitutional crisis, but we will see what the outcome will be.
The new U.S. administration under Donald Trump has signaled a shift in priorities, stating that the US is no longer primarily focused on European security, as you already mentioned. What impact will this have on NATO and on Ukraine defense?
It will have a serious impact. I think that we may actually see a kind of a split within NATO across the line, which exists already today, because there are countries which are never going to give up on Ukraine. I think it's Poland, it's Scandinavian countries, these are the 3 Baltic states, the United Kingdom. But there are countries which have a much more pro-Russian population, which is, like, first of all, Germany, where there is a whole phenomenon of what is called the Putin-Versteher, the one who understands Putin, which emerged during the annexation of Crimea. Then France will see what happens with the presidential election, I believe in 27, with the right wing, the French rally, the Le Pen's party, which has today a very young and charismatic leader, a new leader. So I think we may see some kind of what actually Putin really wanted to see, the division of Europe. We may see that, and the United States withdrawing its unconditional support. So a lot will depend, I think, on nuclear powers like France and the United Kingdom. And it may, of course, have serious consequences for Ukraine in terms of
What
help.
do you mean by that, France and United Kingdom?
Well, because they're nuclear power, and you have to definitely to stand against Russia. I mean, someone needs to provide that kind of security. And I think the United Kingdom is probably the best ally of Ukraine and Europe, because whether left or more of a right, I think it's very committed to help to Ukraine. France is a more worrisome case. Again, we'll see who wins in 2027, and I think Le Pen's party does have a chance to win that election. That will have very grim consequences if that happens.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ruled out NATO membership for Ukraine. How does this align with NATO's long-term strategy, and what alternatives does Ukraine have for security guarantees?
I would say that off the record, like after the annexation of Crimea, there was no serious consideration of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO, because the countries like Turkey and Hungary would never accept it, and it needs to be accepted by every single NATO member. If you remember, even the acceptance of Sweden was blocked for a while by Turkey because of the Swedish support of some of the allegedly Kurdish separatists. So I don't think it was ever on the agenda. It wasn't spoken, at least by the American administration, but I think it was implied. In terms of security, I think the best guarantee, the U.S. president already said that he doesn't want to see any U.S. military in Ukraine. I think the only security which actually can be significant are European troops. So from countries like France, Germany, Sweden, UK, on the line of control if there is a ceasefire.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So can European nations support us, in a proper way, military?
Well, on the line of control, if there are troops, of course, that would be a very serious, even if Trump recalls, because he said he doesn't want to apply if there are European troops, but it's still, he won't call Article 5. So which means that the United States doesn't want to go to war, even if it happens, say, and there are European troops in Ukraine. But I do think that there is a chance. I won't speculate which countries would help. I've already mentioned that there are some countries which are definitely very pro-Ukrainian. And the best way would be to have a combination of troops and military from different European countries on the line of control, because that would, of course, create a huge security risk, even if it's not NATO, but basically Russia would go to war with these countries if their militaries are involved.
And now another moment that bothers me a lot, but that the U.S. position now suggests that restoring Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is unrealistic.
Does this signal a broader shift in Western policy towards Ukraine? And what risks does this pose for international law?
Yes, this is the case. And again, I think off the record, there was a realization in the United States and NATO, even before the full-scale invasion in 22, that it's very unlikely that Ukraine would be able to get Crimea back, at least under Putin. It does provide definitely a very dangerous precedent. We are basically back to pre-World War II or maybe even pre-World War I situation when this kind of territorial grabs are tolerated. But at the same time, there is a more optimistic analogy, if you remember, of the Winter War with Finland. Finland lost a very substantial part of its territory, and also with their population, these are Finno-Ugric people. And they never recall that because they managed to save the country and became a pretty prosperous European country. So yes, it's a dangerous precedent, a very dangerous precedent. But I think Ukraine, I mean, the priority right now, realistically, is to save whatever is possible.
You know what makes me super angry, actually? Yeah. That I think that the U.S. Defense Minister, he said on the recent days that the result of peace deal between Ukraine and Russia won't satisfy neither Zelensky, neither Putin. And I'm like, why the heck we supposed to satisfy the side of the conflict that attacked?
Well, unfortunately, the reality is that Russia still is a nuclear power, extremely nationalist, extremely frightening today. I actually wrote a piece some time ago where I say that Russia never in its history, I think, fought such a horrible war, such a clearly, blatantly aggressive war of aggression. So yeah, we live in a time, I would say, compare it with pre-World War II or pre-World War I. And you know, Fiona Hill, who was a senior advisor on Eurasia, Russia, Ukraine under first Trump administration, was an extremely educated and balanced woman. She's a student of Richard Pipes at Harvard. She recently said that we are at the beginning of World War III, which I wouldn't like to make such predictions, but she's a serious woman. She's definitely wouldn't say so if she didn't believe so. So this is a very grim situation. I agree with you.
Let's make a little shift from external policy to domestic policy of the U.S. U.S. is facing increasing polarization and political instability. Could internal divisions weaken its ability to be a leader on global security issues, including supporting Ukraine? But you already mentioned it will. And if the U.S. steps back from its global leadership role, who will fill the gap? China, EU, or fragmented multipolar order?
So the first part of the question, yes, absolutely. The internal divisions and problems in the United States is a big problem for the whole world. And of course, the countries which celebrate it the most are the U.S. adversaries. If you watch the Russian TV, they're absolutely joyful about that situation. And you know, it's very interesting. There was this very famous American diplomat, George Kennan. In 1946, he wrote what became known as the Long Telegram, which he sent from Moscow to the State Department, where he basically, in a summary, described what he estimated as the threat of the Soviet Union. And he has a wonderful sentence there. He says that the biggest blow against Moscow is actually solving our internal problems. And I think that at that time, he maybe was thinking about Jim Crow years, the segregation, which the Soviet Union, of course, there was institutional racism in the United States at that time, and the Soviet Union was using it. So today, in the same way, it's very upsetting to me how many Americans actually don't realize that the internal divisions are damaging not only to the United States, but actually to the United States stance in the world. I came to the United States over 30 years ago, and I'll tell you, I watched different elections. I remember the recount between Gore and Bush, George W. Bush, when it went to the Supreme Court. We never had that kind of polarization. People today, like, literally won't talk to you or won't date or won't have friends based on those political differences. I've never witnessed anything like that. And that's definitely a very frightening situation. Now, who's going to fill the vacuum? Definitely China. They're already doing it all over the world. And they're doing it what they call soft power, while in fact it's very aggressive. And I'm convinced that it's not just about money and trade. They definitely have a political agenda. They definitely prefer dealing with authoritarian regimes. So EU, I don't see a unity within the EU. So some European countries are pretty maybe more powerful, like Germany, France, but EU as a whole, no. Russia, yes, very aggressively will try to fill out the vacuum wherever it can. But I don't think Russia has enough power like China to do that, at least on the economic level. Was there another part to your question? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, just, you may end.
I forgot if there was another part to your question.
No, actually, who will fill the gap? Yes. Yeah, the vacuum.
Well,
and
okay.
Russia says that it will stop fighting only if the U.S. stops military aid to Ukraine. And again, we're coming back to the military aid to Ukraine. Do you think someone in Washington still believes Moscow in that sense?
I don't think they do, but again, as you said, the priorities have changed. So they probably don't see. I mean, if you think it's a pretty cynic statement, but the United States went to 2 world wars when it was directly attacked. So World War I, in the very end of World War I, because of the Zimmermann telegram and the connections between Nazis and, Germany and, not Nazis, of course, Germany and Mexico. And it was basically the last year of the war. Think about it, World War II, the United States probably would have not gone to war if it hadn't been attacked directly, Pearl Harbor. Now, imagine it was 1941. So what if Japan, actually Kissinger wrote it in one of his last books, imagine if instead of attacking Pearl Harbor, Japan would have attacked Soviet Union, say, from the east in 1941, when the Nazi troops were approaching Moscow. Probably the outcome of the war would have been very difficult, very different. So the United States, I guess, don't have a fear of Russia. And Putin is very manipulative. So he is trying to use those tendencies and political movements today in the United States, which are focusing more on domestic politics and more of a isolationist international politics. So they don't believe them, those forces, but they don't care, I think. That's the problem.